This is a presentation that will examine and analyse the processes involved in producing a blouse. This presentation will have fabrics, costs and techniques all examined to fully understand the outcomes and quality of the garment. To demonstrate the knowledge I hold about how to produce a sample garment, I must begin with the working drawing of the poppy top blouse. This working drawing includes all of the required finishings, such as the neckline information, the seams, the hem finishes, and the hardware involved in its closing. The next step of critical information I must include to ensure that I have shown the production of a sample blouse is the lay plan. The slide focuses on the lay plan of this blouse that one must follow when cutting out the pattern pieces to reduce waste. The lay plan has been laid out on calico fabric due to this being a sample garment, and it has suitable sections for the neckline. The amount of fabric needed for this garment's lay plan is 80 cm by 150 cm of calico on the fold, making it appear more than 80 cm by 75 cm of calico. The amount of fusible is considerably less, with only needing 20 cm by 39 cm. Yet again, this is being cut in the fold, so it is actually 40 cm by 39 cm when unfolded. The purpose of a lay plan is to use the fabric effectively with as much minimal waste as possible, allowing the fabric to be cut in the most cost-effective manner. Waste is also important to minimise in the fashion industry, as within lay plans, the fabric cut-offs are becoming a very large environmental issue around the world. The sections of fabric that are thrown away or cut off make up for 20% of the waste for the entire fashion industry, meaning that these must be minimalised to help lessen the environmental harm caused by the industry as a whole. Lay plans between a sample garment and the industry differ greatly, as with one sample I will cut out the pattern pieces by hand with minimal space between my pattern pieces. Within the industry and large-scale manufacturing processes, this differs greatly, as they will use a computer-based program to cut out the pieces with a machine. Such an example of a software or computer-aided design software is the program known as Gerber. Such programmed lay plans can look like the images shown to the right of this slide. These lay plans are used on multiple layers at once, different to me cutting through only one layer or two layers of fabric. This method of pattern cutting is referred to as spreading or laying, and involves building up layers of fabric for the cutting technology, and depending on such, it could cut through up to 200 layers of fabric at a time. To cut out and properly use this software within the industry, there are multiple options for the machines that use CAD software. Such machines include computer-controlled knife cutting machines, laser cutting machines, rib cutting machines, plasma torch cutting machines, and water jet cutting machines. When making a blouse, and this blouse in particular, there are many fabric type options available for their creation. Some of the main and generalised fabric types suited are cotton, denim, flannel, hemp, leather, linen, velvet, wool, nylon, polyester, acetate, acrylic, polar fleece rayon, and spandex. These fabrics can be used in blend between a few in some cases. I will also have two fabrics analysed, one much higher end than the other, to show the differences in the manufacturing processes and costs between high-end and basic items. The cheaper option for my fabric choices has been sourced from an online retailer called My Fabrics. This is a pink and black patterned fabric with the pattern of leopard spots. The animal printed fabric is made up of 65% viscose and 35% polyester, and costs £6.45 a metre. The care instructions necessitate that this fabric is washed at 30 degrees, is not tumble dried, is ironed at a medium temperature, and that this item can be dry cleaned. I believe that this fabric would work well for this blouse, as it is light, slightly sheer, and a delicate fabric. The more expensive option for my fabric choice is a pastel pink and black silk circle designed fabric that has been sourced from the online seller Joel & Son Fabrics. The retro style print is made up of 77% silk and 73% lame, and costs £229.90 a metre. The care instructions for this fabric simply call for dry clean in any solvent except dichroleucthane. I believe that this fabric type would work well for this blouse, as it would become a sophisticated and versatile evening look. As this blouse will be created with different materials to show the contrast between an industrially produced garment and couture or handmade clothing item, the techniques involved in sewing both will also differ. The techniques involved in the production of a mass-produced item need to be quick and easy to make with cost-effective processes. Therefore, many of the seam finishes for this garment option will require an overlocking machine. Such techniques will be the plain overlocked seam and the overlocked hem. To contrast this, the couture option for this blouse will need a French seam in its creation and a narrow turn and turn hem. The overlocked plain seam that will be used in the creation of this garment can be seen to the left of this slide. This is a common seam seen in the industry but will not lay as flat as other options on the skin once finished. The plain seam overlocked is recognised as the most convenient and quickest seam, regardless of the raw edges being overlocked separately or together. It is both faster and cheaper to press the fabric to one side and overlock it all at once, so this is what will be used. The overlocked plain seam seen on this slide is very suited to the chosen fabric and allows quick sewing to occur. The images seen in this section clearly show the process and appearance of this seam. The diagram provided allows the seam type to be seen, and then the personal example I have provided shows that the final seam will appear like once pressed. Finally, the cross section of the seam shows how the loose ends or threads are captured with the stitching from the overlocker. To summarise the creation of the seam, a plain seam must be sewn correctly first. Then the fabric must be pressed to the slide and overlocked together in a straight line. This must be done for all seam attachment points, including side seams and shoulder seams, for example. The second finish that will be needed for this mass-produced option of this blouse will be the hem. For this, I have chosen a normal overlocked hem. This hem type can be seen in personal images on the lower left of this slide and shows that the raw edge is first overlocked and then sewn into place when folded. This is another finishing found on clothing or garments that are quickly produced by the fashion industry. It's a very simple hem finishing that is quick and effective in its creation. To create this hem, first the fabric edge must be overlocked and then turned up around 3 cm. Once here, the overlocked edge is sewn into place neatly, ensuring that the line of top stitching is neat from the front of the garment. To create the more expensive version of this blouse, there are more complicated and time-consuming techniques involved. Such techniques include a narrow turn and turn hem and French seams. Such a technique would be the French seam finishes for the seams. A French seam is a type of seam that tucks in the raw edges, leaving a clean and polished look to the finished seam. This is a sewing type that works very well with lightweight, delicate fabric, so it would work perfectly for the more expensive option for this blouse. As shown through the diagrams and self-made examples of this seam type, it can be seen how neat and aesthetically pleasing this seam can appear to the wearer. Although it is a small detail to include in a garment, it shows a lot of time, effort and care has gone into the creation of it. As shown through the diagrams and self-made examples of this seam type, it can be seen how neat and aesthetically pleasing this seam can appear to the wearer. Although it is a small detail to include in a garment, it shows a lot of time, effort and care has gone into the creation of it. Diagrams, cross-sections and examples can be seen on this slide of this French seam. To create the French seam, the fabric must begin in a different position to how standard seams are sewn together. Begin by placing the fabric wrong side together and then sewing a straight line and stitching 1 cm into the raw edge. Once this is sewn, the excess edge or fray must be trimmed to roughly 6 mm. Once this has been trimmed, the fabric must be folded over the raw edge again to now have the right sides of fabric facing one another. This encloses the raw edge in place, and to ensure it will stay in place, the seam must be creased, pressed and pinned in place. Finally, sew another line of straight stitching just 6 mm from the new crease and finish by pressing this entire seam to the side. A second technique that must be considered throughout the creation of this high quality blouse is the hem type, which is a narrow turn and turn hem. From the images and diagram provided on this slide, it can be seen how shallow this fold must be and how straight the top stitching must be sewn to appear neat from the front portion of the fabric. It is a similar technique to the French seam, as it also traps the raw edge within itself, as it too has a fold. To sew this hem type, begin by folding the raw edge up once around the entire circumference of the hem. Once this has been done, repeat once again the entire way around the hem. For the narrow rolled and rolled hem, this fold would be slim and as small as possible, roughly 6 mm. Finally, as this fold is now prepared, the straight line of top stitching can be sewn close to the folded hem. This is usually sewn from the right side of the fabric so that it can be seen to be straight on the side that it will actually be seen on. To construct and complete this garment for both the manufactured blouse and the couture blouse, there are similar instructions for both, with the correct finishings are applied to the different items. There are 3 main sections of construction for this garment, and it begins with the neckline and facing. As seen in the top left of the slide, the images provided can show how the facing is an important component of this blouse. To begin the neckline, the facing must first be prepared with the chosen seam types. Once this has been prepared, the blouse shoulder points must be attached with the chosen seam finishings to ensure that the neckline's pleats can be created. After the block pleats have been measured carefully, pinned and sewn in place, the facing can then be pinned around the entire neckline. When it is pinned in place neatly, the facing must be sewn in place along the same line of stitching used for the original sewing of the neckline pleats. To ensure that the bulk of this neckline will be reduced, the neckline should be trimmed expertly with indents into the fabric removed in the shapes of triangles. This will also help the curve of the neckline. Finally, to complete the neckline portion of this garment, the facing must be flipped over and neatly understitched in place on the right side of the fabric when pressed in place. The second section of processes to take place for this garment can be seen with the side seams and the sleeves. After the side seam has been sewn in the chosen seam finishing for the garment, the sleeves must be prepared by sewing the side seams and hem in place. To ensure the sleeve is sewn in place correctly, when pinning the fabric, we'll have notches to ensure that it's correctly matched up. Finally, once the sleeve is prepared, it can be correctly lined up to the armhole and sewn into place. For the final stage of constructing this garment, the centre back and hem must be completed. The centre back panels must be prepared, either with an overlocking stitch or a rolled hem. After this has been prepared correctly, the centre back can be neatly pinned together from the keyhole neckline to the hem. This includes sewing the facings together at the seam point. Once this has been sewn correctly, the seam must be pressed open before the garment is pressed and finished. The next stage of producing a sample garment for this blouse includes breaking down the costs and the manufacturing costs involved in both versions of it. The final cost of this garment can be calculated by taking many aspects of the creation of the garment into consideration, such as the labour costs, the fabric costs, and the packaging means. When completing the cost sheet process for the cheaper garment prototype, the total recommended retail price cost £80.80. This cost is as low as it could be, as the fabric and trimmings were already halved to ensure that an accurate price for the fashion industry could be reached. I have, however, intended for this garment to make back 100% of its profit to ensure that the brand and the retailer will make enough profit off the garment. I also compiled another costing sheet for this garment process, one for the more expensive garment. Although many components remained the same, such as thread costs and labour costs, the final recommended retail price was drastically different, as it equaled to £675.70. This is also done with half of the original price for the fabric option to ensure it is accurate to the fashion industry's pricing. To conclude and evaluate this garment analysis, many aspects must be taken into consideration. When evaluating the choices for this blouse fabric I have selected, I believe that both blouses have been very aesthetically pleasing. Although one is much more expensive than the other to create, I do also believe that the cheaper option would still make a very sophisticated blouse. It is in my opinion that the techniques I have selected for both options of the blouse are realistic and advised for in their areas in industry. Finer garments do have to take more care when sewing them, ensuring that the use of the French seam and rolled hem is warranted for them. In conclusion, I believe that these garments are successful in their areas of expense. However, I do believe that for such an expensive price, the blouse may need to be more fitted or extravagant when made in a more expensive fabric option. Regardless of this, the more expensive option for this blouse would be of much higher quality than the cheaper one due to the techniques used.